Have you ever climbed into bed completely exhausted, only to discover that your body's ready for sleep, but your brain has other plans? Well, it used to happen to me all the time. One thought becomes another, and then another. You replay conversations from earlier in that day. You rewrite conversations from years ago. You imagine conversations that haven't even happened yet, or scenarios. You think about what you should have said, what you're going to say tomorrow, or how someone might react, how you should respond. Then your mind jumps somewhere else. What if I made the wrong decision? What if I don't see something important? What if all this goes wrong? What if it's a worst case scenario? Eventually, somehow, you fall asleep, only to wake up the next morning, you guessed it, already tired, before you even put your feet on the floor. Okay? Because you started with the thoughts again. If you've ever lived that, I want you to know something. You're not alone. It seems strange, but you're not strange. For years, I lived in that place too. I eventually gave it a name. I used to call it running the reels because it was like a movie going on in my head. That's exactly what it felt like sitting alone in a movie theater, watching scene after scene play across the screen of my own mind. Some of the movies were about yesterday, some were about tomorrow. Most of them never even happened at all. But usually they were worst case scenarios. But they felt so real. The strange thing about overthinking is that it doesn't feel like you're wasting time. It feels responsible. It feels like you're being careful, being productive, planning in advance. Trust me, I know. It even feels intelligent. You tell yourself that you're preparing. You're just being realistic. You're thinking things through. I used to believe that too, for a long time, years. But when I look back now, whoa, I realized there was something underneath almost every reel that I was running. Fear. That's what it was. Not the kind that makes you scream. The quiet kind. The kind that whispers, what if? What if you fail? What if you're wrong? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if people judge you? What if you're not enough? What if something terrible happens and you didn't see it coming? Nobody else could hear those whispers, but they were loud enough to keep me awake, loud enough to steal my mornings too, loud enough to convince me that if I just thought a little longer, I'd finally find peace. Except that's not what happened, because one thought leads to another. And fear has a strange way of bargaining with us. It says, just think about it one more time. It's like a trap. Just think about it one more time so you don't make a mistake. So nothing catches you by surprise. And so you're finally ready. And every time you agree, it asks for one more thought, one more scenario, one more movie, one more reel. Until one day you realize you've spent hours preparing for conversations that never happened, hours running the reels, solving problems that never existed, and carrying burdens that belonged to a future that never even arrived. I don't know exactly when it happened, but one day I stopped in the middle of one of those mental movies, and I asked myself a question that I'd never asked before. If all this thinking is supposed to protect me, why do I feel so afraid still? That question changed everything. Because for the first time, I wasn't looking at the movies. I was looking at the projector. When I said I stopped looking at the movies and started looking at the projector, this is what I meant. The movies weren't really the problem. The thoughts weren't the problem either. The projector was. Because every movie starts somewhere, right? And when I looked honestly at my own life, I realized something. My projector was powered by one simple question. What if? What if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if people don't understand? What if something goes terribly wrong? It was almost as if my brain believed that if I could imagine every possible disaster, it could somehow prevent it from happening. Looking back now, I can see how exhausting that was. Imagine hiring someone to guard the front door. Instead of protecting your house, they spend all night ringing the doorbell. That's what my mind was doing. It was not protecting my peace, that's for sure. It was interrupting it. And here's the strange part. I thought I was being careful. But careful and fearful is not the same thing. For years, I did confuse the two. Being careful helps you cross the road safely, but fear keeps you standing on the sidewalk long after the traffic is already gone. Being careful helps you prepare for an interview. Fear convinces you to rehearse every possible question until you're too exhausted to even think clearly. Being careful helps you to make thoughtful decisions. Fear convinces you that there must be one perfect decision. And if you think just a little longer, you'll finally figure it out. I can't tell you how many hours of my life disappeared that way. Hours I never got back. Hours that could have been spent laughing, creating, learning, and living. Instead, I was watching movies that almost never became reality. And then one day another thought hit me. I couldn't remember the last time that I had imagined something wonderful with the same intensity. Have you ever noticed that overthinkers are incredibly creative? The problem is, we often use that creativity to imagine everything that we fear instead of the good things. We should use it for everything we hope for. We become brilliant directors of films that we never wanted to watch. That's when I asked myself another question. What if all this time I wasn't preparing for life? What if I was trying to negotiate with uncertainty? Because uncertainty is uncomfortable, right? Let's face it. It always has been. We all want to be sure of things. We don't like not knowing. We want guarantees. We want to reduce risk. We want certainty. And we want to know that if we make this decision, everything will work out. If we say yes, it will be the right yes. If we say no, it will be the right no and we won't regret it later. But life never makes these promises. Not to you, not to me, not to anyone really. And yet, I spent years asking my mind to solve a problem that couldn't be solved. I wanted certainty from a future that hadn't even happened yet. And then one morning, before I even got out of bed, I caught myself running the reels again. And for the first time, instead of believing every movie, I smiled because I recognized what was happening. I wasn't predicting the future. I was feeding my fear. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. It hit me in the middle of an ordinary moment. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just a quiet, almost unsettling clarity that slipped in without warning. And once it was there, I couldn't unsee it. It was so clear to me. That was the strange thing. Nothing in my life had actually changed. Same room, same responsibilities, same uncertainties. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't trapped inside the movies. I was sitting in the projection room, and that changed everything. Because if I wasn't the movie, then maybe I wasn't as powerless as I thought in controlling this. At first, I didn't try to stop the films. That would have been impossible. Overthinking doesn't just disappear just because you ask it to. Instead, I started doing something much simpler. I started noticing. When a thought began with, what if? I didn't follow it immediately. I paused, just for a second, and I asked myself a different question. What is actually happening right now? Right now. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Most of the time, the answer was surprisingly calm. Nothing was on fire. No one was judging me in that exact moment. No disaster was unfolding. It was just me sitting there, with a mind that had gotten very good at telling stories. And slowly that pause became a habit. Not a perfect one. There were still days when I got pulled into the movies. Days when I forgot everything I had learned. Days when the projector ran nonstop, for sure. But even on those days, something was different. I noticed sooner. I came back faster, and over time, with practice, I began to experiment. If my mind was so good at imagining worst case scenarios, what would happen if I could gently redirect it, not force it, not fight it, just nudge it? What if this goes well? At first, it felt kind of unnatural, that's for sure, almost uncomfortable. We're not used to thinking like that. My brain resisted. It preferred the familiar scripts, but I kept trying. What if I handle this better than I expect? What if people are more understanding than I think? What if this turns into something good? I wasn't trying to convince myself everything would be perfect. I was just opening another possibility, a more positive one. And something surprising happened. The intensity of the fear began to soften, not disappear right away, just loosen its grip. Because fear thrives on uncertainty. It wants you to believe that the worst outcome is inevitable. But the moment you introduce another possibility, even a small one, that certainty cracks. And in that crack, there's a space. Space to breathe, space to choose, space to live. I also started noticing something else. The projector didn't just run on fear, it ran on attention. The more I fed a thought, the louder it became. The more I replayed a scenario, the more real it felt. So I began to be more careful with where I placed my attention. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Sometimes that meant stepping away from the thought. Sometimes it meant writing it down instead of carrying it around with me. Sometimes it meant doing something simple, like going for a walk, or calling a friend, or focusing on the task in front of me. Little things, but they mattered. Because every time I chose not to feed the fear, I was quietly changing the way the projector worked. And over time, the movies began to change too. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. There were more moments of quiet, more moments of clarity, more moments where I wasn't stuck in my head, but actually present in my life. And that's when I understood something I wish I had known years earlier, because I wasted so much time with this. Overthinking isn't a flaw. It's a skill that's been pointed in the wrong direction. The same mind that can imagine every possible disaster can also imagine possibilities, solutions, opportunities, growth. It's not about shutting the projector off. It's about learning how to guide it. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real freedom begins. For me, it was. What changed wasn't that I became better at overthinking. It was that I finally understood what I had been doing. I stopped believing every movie that my mind decided to play. And once I stopped believing every movie, I stopped feeling like I had to watch every one. And something unexpected happened. The reels began to slow down. Not because life suddenly became easy, not because every problem disappeared, but because I finally understood that I didn't have to solve tomorrow before I was allowed to enjoy today. These days, when my head touches the pillow, it's quiet. Not because I solved every problem, not because I know what tomorrow will bring, but because I finally gave myself permission. Permission to let tomorrow arrive before I try to live it. Life is still uncertain, it always will be. But uncertainty isn't something that I have to fight anymore. It's simply part of being alive. So tonight, when your head finally touches the pillow and the first reel begins to roll, I hope you'll remember this conversation. I hope you'll recognize what's happening, and I hope you'll smile, because you'll know that you've seen this movie before. And then, before you sit through another 2-hour feature that only exists inside your own mind, remember one simple thing. Just because your mind shows you a movie doesn't mean you have to buy a ticket. Maybe that's the real secret. Not learning how to control every thought, not eliminating every fear, but finally realizing that every thought isn't a command, every fear isn't a prediction, and every movie doesn't deserve an audience. If this message spoke to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. So tell me, have you ever caught yourself running the reels without even realizing it? And if you do tonight, don't be hard on yourself. Just smile, because now you'll know. You'll know exactly what's happening. And sometimes recognizing the pattern is the first step toward finally changing the ending. See you next time on the Bold Life Suite. Thanks for being here.